To set up the game of Eminent Domain, first set up the game area. The central card display will be placed in the center of the playing area. Locate the 5 decks of cards that correspond to the central display, and place the decks under their matching space on the display. Place the black bordered influence tokens near the central display. Place the 8 blue bordered influence tokens to the side. These will only be used in the last round of the game, if necessary. Next, locate the technology cards which have a planet or planets on the bottom right corner. Sort these cards into 3 piles based on the type of planet shown. Place all 3 of the technology card decks face up in the middle of the playing area. Next, shuffle the pile of planet cards and place them face down in the middle of the playing area. Finally, place the 4 types of resource tokens and the fighter tokens into a general supply. After setting up the game area, each player will set up their player area, which is known as their empire. First, each player will be randomly dealt a start planet tile, which they will place face down in their player area. Any unused start planets are removed from the game. Next, each player will create their draw deck. To do this, all players will be dealt 1 politics card. Any remaining politics cards are removed from the game. Each player will also be dealt 1 warfare card, 2 colonize cards, 2 research cards, 2 survey cards, and 2 produce trade cards. All players will combine their 10 cards into a single deck, shuffle the cards thoroughly, and place them face down in their player area. These cards will become their player draw deck. Each player will then draw the top 5 cards of their player draw deck. These cards will become their hand. Finally, each player is randomly dealt 1 of the player aid tiles, which will help them play the game. Each player will flip over their player aid tile. The player that receives the player aid tile that says Start Player on it will become the first leader. Any unused player aid tiles are removed from the game. After the game area and each player's area have been set up, the game is ready to begin. The game plays out in 3 phases. The leader, who starts with the Start Player turn order tile, will begin and play through the 3 phases. Then play will continue in clockwise order, with a new player being the leader each turn. The first phase of a player's turn is the action phase. This is an optional phase. During the action phase, the leader can choose to play 1 card from their hand and use its action. When they use a card for its action, they will place it face up in front of them, and then complete whatever it says in the action section. After they use the action of the card, they will place that card face up next to their draw deck in a discard pile. Each type of card has a specific action listed on the card under the action heading. Let's take a look at the individual action that each card gives. When a player uses a survey card action, it allows them to draw 2 cards from their player deck and add them to their hand. The warfare action allows the player to choose to do one of the 2 following actions. The first action is to gain 1 fighter token from the supply and place it in their player area. There are different sized fighters in the game. They all count the same. The other option is to attack 1 planet. Attacking planets allows you to flip over one of your planet cards, which gives you points for the end of the game and some added benefits throughout the game. Planets are either the planet tile each player starts the game with, or cards they collect throughout the game. Each planet will have a fighter symbol on the card, with a number. This tells the amount of fighters they must discard back to the supply to attack that planet. So to attack this planet, this player would have to discard 6 of their fighter tokens. When they successfully attack the planet, they will flip it over to show that it is part of their empire. The colonize action allows a player to choose one of 2 actions. The first action is to tuck the colonize card from their hand under a planet in their empire. The other option they have while using the colonize action is to colonize a planet. In the same way that there are warfare amounts on each planet, there are also colonize amounts on each planet. Colonizing planets is another way to gain planets for your empire and gain points and extra benefits. To colonize a planet, a player must have the number of colonize cards tucked under the planet or colonize symbols on other planets in their empire that they have already attacked or colonized. Planets a player has flipped over in their player area that have a colonize symbol on them allow that player to reduce the cost of colonizing any future planet by 1 for each symbol shown on a planet. For example, this planet has 1 colonize symbol. So now the amount of tucked colonize cards under this planet is reduced by 1. To colonize a planet, they flip over the planet and remove any colonized cards from under the planet, and place them in their player discard pile. If a player uses the produce action of their produce trade card, they may add one resource to an empty resource slot on one of their planets that they have colonized or attacked. The resource will be of the corresponding color. If any of the resources run out during the game, a player may use any other colored resource as a stand-in for that resource. If a player chooses to use a trade side of a produce trade card, they may return one of the resource tokens that they placed on a planet to the supply, and gain one influence token. If they decide to use a research action, they will choose up to 2 cards from their hand to remove from the game. The removed cards may include the research card that was just played. These cards will be removed from the game, not placed into the player's discard pile. This can be a strategic move to remove cards from your deck that you might not want anymore. Finally, if a player decides to use the politics action, they will remove the card from the game, and then they will choose any one of the 5 cards from the central display and add it to their hand cards. After the leader player has chosen whether or not to use an action of one of their hand cards, they will move into Phase 2, the roll phase. During the roll phase, the leader player will be required to choose one card from the central card display as their roll for that turn. This card will eventually be added to their deck. They may then decide whether or not to boost the card they chose. To do this, they will play any number of the cards from their hand with symbols matching that card. The player may also look to any planets they have flipped up in their player area. If the planet has a matching symbol in its top left corner, the player may use that symbol to boost their roll as well. The more cards and matching planet symbols they add to the flipped up card, the stronger the benefit of their roll will be. After the leader plays their cards, all other players in clockwise order will either dissent or follow the leader's roll. When they dissent, they will draw one card from their player deck and add it to their hand. When they choose to follow, they will place any number of their matching symboled cards face up in front of them. They do not have to follow just because they have matching symbols. When a player follows, they may also use matching symbols on their flipped up planet cards. Whenever the leader, or any player that follows the leader, plays their cards, they will immediately complete the roll ability for the cards they played. Each type of card has a different roll. Let's take a look at each of the cards' rolls. Whenever a player uses the roll of survey cards, they will count the number of symbols they have, and subtract 1 from that number. Then they will draw that amount of cards from the planet deck. They will look at the front and the back of each of these cards and decide on one of them to keep. The ones they do not keep will be placed into the discard pile next to the planet deck. The planet card they decide to keep will be placed face down in their player area near their other planets. If at any time the planet deck runs out of cards, shuffle the discard pile and form a new planet deck. The leader player who chose the roll has a special bonus when they take their roll. They are able to look at planet cards equal to the number of survey symbols and choose one planet card to keep. The warfare card allows a player to gain 1 fighter token per warfare symbol they have. The leader that chose the roll has a special ability that they may choose. Instead of collecting fighters, they may use their existing fighters to attack any one of their planets. Attacking planets is done in the same way it is done in the action phase, with a player discarding fighter tokens equal to the warfare cost on a planet card, and then flipping the planet card over to claim it as part of your empire. The colonize roll allows the player to place their played colonize cards from their hand under their planet cards. If the player is the leader, they may choose to settle one of their planets instead of adding colonize cards to a planet by having colonize cards and any planets with matching colonize symbols equaling the colonize amount on their planet card. Then they will flip over the colonized planet and discard any of the colonized cards to their player discard pile. The produce card allows a player to add 1 resource token per production symbol played to an empty resource slot on their flipped over planets. They may only gain resources equal to the amount of empty slots they have. So even though this player had 4 produce symbols, they may only gain 3 resources, matching the corresponding image. An image such as this allows them to choose any colored resource. If any resource token color runs out, a player may use any colored resource token as a stand-in for that color. The only time the leader gets an extra bonus is when all of the cards have run out from that stack. In this case, the leader will add 1 to the total number of produced symbols they play to make up for the card they couldn't draw. The trade roll allows a player to return 1 resource they placed on a planet per trade symbol they played. They will gain 1 influence token per resource they return to the supply. Just as with the produce roll, the trade roll does not have a special leader bonus, unless the stack runs out. In this case, the leader adds 1 to the amount of trade symbols they have, to make up for the card they didn't draw. Finally, the research card allows a player a chance to gain a technology card. They are not required to purchase a technology card if they do not wish to. There is also no leader bonus for the research roll, unless the stack of cards runs out. When the stack runs out, a player may still choose this roll. They will simply add 1 to their research symbols to make up for the card they didn't get to draw. When a player does use the research roll to gain a technology card, they will take any 1 technology card from the technology piles. Before they can take one of the cards, a player must have all of the prerequisites for that card. Each card has a planet cost and a research card cost. So this player must have at least 1 advanced planet flipped over and 3 research symbols to gain this technology card. This player could gain that technology card. When a player gains most types of technology cards, they will add them to their hand. Some technology cards will not be placed into a player's hand. These cards have the word permanent written on them. They will be placed face up in the player's player area. The player may choose which side they would like to use. The other side will be ignored for the rest of the game. Technology cards have several benefits in the game. Most technology cards have an action listed on them, which may be used during a player's action phase, in place of one of the other cards. For instance, this player could use this technology card to gain 1 influence for each type of resource they produce during this turn. The player will discard the action card to their discard pile as normal at the end of their turn. Many technology cards also have symbols on the top left corner. These may be placed down to boost a card during the roll phase. So this player could use this technology to add 2 produced symbols during the roll phase. Finally, technology cards also give a player influence points at the end of the game. After all players have chosen whether to follow or dissent from the leader, they will move on to the final phase of a player's turn, the cleanup phase. The final phase of a player's turn is the cleanup phase. There are 3 main steps to this phase. The first step is for all players to place cards they played into their own player discard pile. The only cards that will not be discarded are the cards played under planets as colonies. The next step is only done by the player who is currently the leader. This player will look at their hand cards and discard any number of cards they choose to their player discard pile. After the leader discards their chosen cards, they will draw cards if necessary to reach their hand limit. The base hand limit in the game is 5 cards. The limit can be increased if a player has flipped over a planet card with a symbol such as this, which adds 1 to their hand limit. If at any time a player's draw pile runs out, they will shuffle their discard pile and form a new draw pile. When a player finishes their cleanup phase, their turn as the leader is over, and the player to their left will become the new leader. The end of the game is triggered when either the influence tokens run out, or when a defined number of card stacks run out from the center display. In a 2 or 3 player game, the game end is triggered when any 1 stack of cards runs out. In a 4-player game, the game end is triggered when any 2 stacks of cards run out. When either of these 2 events occurs, the game will continue until all players have had an equal amount of turns as the leader in the game. If a player earns an influence token during the last round, and the influence tokens have run out, use the 8 tokens set aside during the beginning of the game. If all of these tokens run out, a player may use any other item as a stand-in for influence tokens. When the game is over, all players will score their total influence points. This will include their actual influence tokens, influence points on any technology cards they have gained, and any influence points found on their face-up planet cards. The player who ends the game with the most influence points wins. If there is a tie, the player with the most total resource tokens and fighter tokens remaining wins the game.